Ladies and gentlemen, our program will begin in just a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, our program will begin in just a moment.
Good evening.
Oh. Oliver.
Huh? Hey.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen.
You made it.
Welcome, Commissioner. Good day. Welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by AJC. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's digital platform that enables you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. Today's program is brought to you in partnership with Jewish Insider. You can sign up for Jewish Insider's daily kickoff by visiting jewishinsider.com. We are delighted to be joined today by Olivér Várhelyi, the European Commissioner for Neighborhood Policy and Enlargement. Commissioner Várhelyi, a Hungarian lawyer and diplomat, is responsible for strengthening relations with 16 of the European Union's closest eastern and southern neighboring countries. Commissioner Várhelyi will be in a wide-ranging conversation with AJC CEO David Harris. After we hear from Commissioner Várhelyi and David, we will take your questions. You may email your questions to questions@ajc.org, questions is plural, or use the Q&A chat feature in Zoom. David, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jillian, and hello to everyone in our worldwide audience. I last had the pleasure of seeing the Commissioner in December in Brussels. He had just begun his 5-year term, and Daniel Schwalmenthal, our director in Brussels, who has been a longtime friend of the Commissioner, and I had a wonderful conversation with him. And we very much wanted to bring him to the AJC program. So first of all, Oliver, a welcome to you. I wanted to begin by asking you to explain, because I'm sure there are many on this call, especially in the United States, who really don't understand exactly what European neighborhood and enlargement policy means, what that portfolio is, and what a commissioner is. We know the term secretary and minister, but why don't you explain to the audience exactly what you do?
Okay. If I want to put it in a very simple way, I would say that we are the ones in the Commission who are supposed to run the daily business of the European Union. Daily business meaning implementing the EU policies and also to design in many areas, not in all areas, like for instance in defense, there are some limitations still, but we are here to put together European policy and implement. Now, the neighborhood and enlargement policy, which I'm responsible for, is quite an interesting one because previously it was all regarded as foreign policy. But we have realized over the years that the neighborhood of the European Union, be it East, South, or the Western Balkans, is much more than just foreign policy. We are sharing the continent with the Western Balkans, we're sharing the continent with the Eastern Partner countries, and of course, our immediate neighbors on the other side of the Mediterranean have also very close ties with us. And as you know, neighborhood is something where we have to be strongest. Neighborhood is where we would have to have the best friends and the most influence. And this is why I think that my portfolio, of course, I'm super biased on this one, is very important. If you look at the developments around the neighborhood, you see that this is very high on the agenda.
So I want to tell our audience, Oliver, you're being rather modest because the territory that you're responsible for is really not only vast, but not without its challenges. To illustrate the point, and you'll talk more, if I'm not mistaken, you deal with the 5 North African countries from Morocco straight across to Egypt. In the Middle East, you deal with our own beloved Israel. You deal with the Palestinian territories, with Syria, with Lebanon, with Jordan, not without its challenges. In the Eastern Partnership, if I recall, you have Ukraine, Belarus, you have Moldova, Georgia, and you have Azerbaijan and Armenia. On top of that, you have the countries that are in accession talks at one stage or another, from Albania to Turkey to North Macedonia, and more. Does that pretty much define the geographic area, or did I miss something big?
David, that is correct, and thank you for listing it instead of me. That is correct.
I spent all night memorizing it.
And as you have listed, it's not only a vast area, but it's very diverse, with completely different challenges. If you look at the Eastern partner countries, especially Ukraine, they're faced with completely different challenges than, let's say, countries in the Western Balkans, or even in the Maghreb, or the countries in the Middle East. They all have completely different challenges, but I tried to put together themes that would encompass the entire neighborhood of the EU. And that is to increase our leverage, our presence. This is what I got the assignment for from our President Ursula von der Leyen. And I try to raise our leverage and presence in all of these neighborhoods. I already found one or two issues that is vital in any of the neighborhoods: prosperity and security, and peace, maybe. Overarching issue that I try to push in each and every single country.
I think we're having a sound problem, Gillian, are we?
Yes, slightly. We're working on it.
Should I repeat?
Oh, good, you're back. So, Oliver, I want to speak about some specific countries. You can imagine which countries included, but just to illustrate this point, because there are 27 commissioners, or what we would call in the United States secretaries of state, defense, or in Europe, ministers. Take the country of Turkey. So you have some specific responsibilities, of course, but Turkey also presents migration challenges. It presents strategic challenges to member states like Greece and Cyprus. How does your ministry or office align with the other offices that also have to deal with Turkey as part of their portfolio?
Yes, correct. We have as many commissioners as member states. So currently we have 27. And of course, within the commission, just like any administration, you likened it to the US government, the federal government. Of course, tasks are distributed among the members of the commission. We have a vice president who is responsible for foreign policy as such, and who is also a high representative of the EU on the council side. The council, more or less like the Senate, because it is composed of the representatives of the member states. But those are not directly elected, but they are delegated by the governments. So in that sense, it is an intergovernmental body where Josep Borrell, the high representative and the vice president at the same time, is also running foreign policy. So he's the one, the key figure within the commission, being responsible for the cluster, so to speak, within the commission responsible for foreign affairs. And then we have my portfolio, which is dedicated to the neighborhood. And in that, my task is to bring cooperation, partnership to these regions. And for that, I have means as well, financial means, and also the political means in place. But we're working together with Josep Borrell on that one. And we have also our two colleagues, or three colleagues rather. We have Mr. Hogan, who is responsible for trade. We have Jutta Urpilainen, who is responsible for humanitarian aid. And we have Josef Lenacic, who is responsible for the emergencies, also including humanitarian ones. So we are working as a team of 5 commissioners with Joseph Borrell in charge of the classic foreign affairs.
Thank you for clarifying that. Now, you, Oliver, are known, you're well known to us, to Daniel Schwamenthal, as a great friend of Israel and of the Jewish people. From a personal perspective, could you tell us, is there something in your own biography that helps explain that strong feeling you have about connecting to Israel and fighting anti-Semitism?
Well, I would, first of all, I was introduced as a Hungarian lawyer. And being a Hungarian brings a very special responsibility when it comes to Israel and when it comes to the Jewish community. I don't think I need to explain why. For me personally, this is a very important issue. This is something that I've been pursuing also when I was working for the Hungarian government. Second, I'm from Szeged, and as you might know, Szeged was the second biggest Jewish community town in Hungary before the Second World War.
And I think Elie Wiesel, wasn't Elie Wiesel from Szeged?
Yeah. So with the second largest synagogue after Budapest, with a very flowerful and colorful Jewish life in the city, and you can still see the signs of that. So I've been born and raised in that town, so I have also fond memories from my childhood. For me, this has always been a key topic, and lastly, as a good Christian, I always try to stand up for those who are being sidelined, who are being cornered, who are being put aside, or who are being bullied. So for me, that is a natural born instinct to defend everybody who is in a difficult position.
We value your friendship greatly, Oliver, and just in the interest of full disclosure to the audience, my father was born in Budapest, so there is a connection here. Oliver, as you know, when it comes to the relations between the European Union and Israel, it's complicated. In some respects, it's extremely strong in the areas of research and development, for example. In other areas, particularly political areas, we have challenges. For example, the fact that for nearly 8 years, I believe, the EU-Israel Association Council has not met. Can you talk to us about the politics and the complications of creating a deeper partnership, even strategic relationship between the EU and Israel, as some member states already have with Israel?
Well, as you know, this commission sees also a major opportunity in raising our relationship with Israel. Israel is a key partner and a strategic partner in the region. Israel is the security guarantee for the region. So we very highly value the cooperation that we have. And I fully agree with you that we have quite a bit of potential to increase. If I look at the economic cooperation, what I see is that we have really booming, flourishing economic relationship. We have very good relations when it comes to research and development. So now it is high time to turn it into a political gain for both sides. And this is why I've been quick to congratulate the new government, but I've been equally quick when taking office to try to work on this and try to get this imbalance in our relationship remedied. So what I hope, I cannot give you promises at this stage, but certainly we're working on getting this association council sitting together, pinpoint the priorities that are common to both Israel and the EU. And I see a need, not only on the side of Israel, but also on our side.
So I know that there are certain things you can say and certain things you cannot say in a setting like this. but can you describe at all what are the political hurdles or obstacles to what for many of us seems like a very natural strategic partnership? In fact, when we speak about all the countries in your portfolio, I mean, Israel stands out not only as a democratic country, but as a world leader in many areas, from cybersecurity to defense to research on COVID-19. What are the obstacles?
Well, of course, when we're talking about the EU-Israel relations, one issue dominates, unfortunately, the whole discussion, and that is the Middle East peace process. And I must admit, I think it over-dominates, and most of the time also prevents us from creating a positive momentum. So my plan is to try to build something that is meaningful and something on which we can build when we talk about the Middle East peace process as well. So I would like to change a bit the dynamics by putting forward a positive agenda. And of course, the Middle East peace process is no easy question to deal with. But rushing it and pushing it to extremes wouldn't help solving it either. But I think if we can build a positive agenda next to it, that could help to create trust on both sides. And this is what I try to work on.
So could you expand a little bit on your vision of that positive agenda? What would it look like?
First, as you said, why don't we have an association council meeting? Let's sit together. Let's see. We have a new government in Israel. Let's see in which areas we can cooperate. Let's see where we can deepen our relations. I see an enormous potential in the security cooperation with Israel. I think this is key. We have a lot to learn from Israel on that. I see a huge potential on research and development. I see huge potential when it comes to green energy. I see huge potential when it comes to culture. I mean, we have an untapped, a gigantic untapped potential. We are much more linked with Israel than with any other country in the region. So we should try to build on that and profit from that. And if there are positive spillovers on that basis to the Middle East peace process, then we're doing the right thing.
So it seems to me, first of all, that by linking so much to the peace process, in a sense, the EU is handing over veto power to the Palestinians, in effect, because you know very well how many times there have been efforts to create a two-state solution, going back as far as 1947 or going forward to various administrations in the 21st century. And Israel is being punished, it seems, in some ways, for the absence of a partner at the table. So that's one thing I would just put out there for your reaction. The other thing which I would say is, in our conversations with many of your colleagues that Daniel Schromenthal and I have had, there's often a sense that deepening relations with Israel is somehow a favor to Israel. You're framing it exactly in the opposite. You're saying it's in the EU's interest to deepen our relationship with Israel, that we, the EU, will benefit from deepening the relationship. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yes, this is what I think. Wherever I look in the neighborhood, you can only be credible if you are there to build something together, and then you can have trust in one another. And if you really want to achieve things in the region, then you have to be interested in developing the partnership. Now, on the Middle East peace process, this is why our line has been, together with the president, that we have a principled position, the EU position, which is a two-state solution. But the two-state solution cannot be created without a dialogue, without meaningful negotiations, and without sitting together at the table with all key partners: Israel, the Palestine authorities, the US, the EU, and of course all the other players who have been part of this process. So and it will not arrive just by claiming that it should be done. We have to work for it. It's difficult. It's been quite a while that we have been unable to solve it, but we're not going to solve it by dramatizing further and further the whole story.
Thank you for saying it as clearly as you did, Oliver. Just one other thought on this topic, if I may, from my many visits to Brussels and our many meetings. We hear Africa very much on the minds of many of the EU leaders, concerns about the future of Africa, the impact of climate change in particular, and the fear that if Africa weakens, migration will move north toward Libya, toward other points of embarkation to Europe. It occurred to us that Israel is the perfect partner here for the EU, that Israel has the know-how to work on the ground in areas like water management, food security, drip irrigation, the impact of environmental change, as a partner of the EU to advance the well-being of Africa. And it becomes a win-win-win for Africa, for Israel and the EU. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely, absolutely. This is why I also mentioned these areas, because you have vast knowledge accumulated in Israel. Also, you have tremendous know-how, which we can rely on. And I don't see much of a difference in terms of approach, because if I look at the approach of Israel, what I see is that building a resilient economy is the first step to make. And this is what our thinking is when I look at the southern neighborhood, so the Maghreb countries. Our plan is to bring forward investment into the economy, creating growth and jobs locally, creating the necessary basis of a decent life for everybody in the region. And this is why we are engaging now with these partners as well, so that we can deliver on that to them as well. So there isn't much of a difference, but we just have to find the common ground how to do it.
Great, thank you for that. A couple more questions, if I may, related to Israel, Oliver, and then we'll move on to other topics and then our audience questions. One is this periodic question that goes back, I mean, many years. I remember to Cathy Ashton and others in the EU about EU funding in the Palestinian territories and whether it goes to its intended recipients for the intended purpose, or whether any of those funds are misused, abused, whether for payments to families of terrorists, et cetera, et cetera. I know you've taken an interest in the subject. Can you share with our audience what you can about EU monitoring of the allocation of funds and their distribution?
I know that this is a hot topic. I'm following very carefully the Israeli media on that one, and I've been confronted with this question also in the European Parliament. There are members of the European Parliament who are very active on that and who are very vigilant about this issue. And so am I, because I think the credibility of the EU can only be ensured if we make sure, 100% sure, that no EU funds are getting to terrorist organizations or people who can be associated with these organizations. And as I said also in the European Parliament, I take these concerns very seriously myself. So we're looking into what has happened. So far, I have been told that there were no cases, but I have asked the two ambassadors who are responsible for managing these funds to look deep into these issues and be extremely conscious about the implications of these issues. So should we find any wrongdoing, we will remedy it and we'll make sure that it will not happen if it did. I hope it didn't. But if it did, we will rectify it.
Thank you, Oliver. And on this issue, again, as you know, there was a recent sort of news flurry with the EU's top diplomat in Ramallah, who made a statement that that individuals, unless they were listed by their exact names on an EU list were not necessarily ineligible, or their organizations were not ineligible to receive EU funding. And we've had cases now of PFLP, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and others. Is this an area also where you're exploring as to exactly what constitutes a legitimate and an illegitimate NGO?
This is exactly the kind of issues I've asked the head of delegation, including the head of delegation in Ramallah, to look into and give me a full inquiry and full report.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So let's move on to another simple issue in your large portfolio, the issue of Turkey. We mentioned it briefly at the beginning, but Turkey represents both opportunity and challenge for the EU. It always has. And certainly that's the case today. What is your slice of the Turkey file? And to what degree does your slice of it come up against the other issues, Turkey and migration, Turkey vis-a-vis Cyprus and the exclusive economic zone, Turkey vis-a-vis overflights of Greece, et cetera, et cetera? What's your slice of it and how do you handle it?
Well, as an introducing remark, what I can tell you is that our relationship with Turkey doesn't become any easier by the day.
Okay.
But it's a very, very complex one. After all, Turkey is our biggest NATO ally, apart from the US. So this is something that we always have to keep in mind. Second, we share the customs union with Turkey. So economically speaking, they're not as close as the EEA countries, but almost as close as they are. But on the other hand, we have many controversies amongst us. And also Turkey is a country with accession negotiations, although halted. So it's a very complex relationship. And I think it will require strategic thinking on both sides. And once we are over with the pandemic, I'm quite sure that this issue will come back on the table. But of course, the recent developments does not help any solution to it. If I look at the drilling around Cyprus, the latest mapping exercise as it was presented, very close to Greek islands, or the agreement concluded with the Libyan government.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, these are not helping us to get closer to a solution. My part of all this is to work on the enlargement aspect and to work on the reforms, and also to provide help, financial assistance to the country and to the civil organizations in the country. On the other hand, as a sort of a deputy, if you will, foreign minister, I tried to help Joseph Borrell, but also the president, to come up with a strategic thinking when it comes to our relationship and the future relationship with Turkey. But I must tell you, it's very difficult if you have such open conflicts with at least two of our member states.
So let's move to a less challenging area for a moment, the West Balkans. So I see from your work and from your social media and all, there's a lot of focus, a lot of concentration on the Western Balkans, on Albania, on Kosovo, on North Macedonia. Are you, on the whole, optimistic about moving in the direction of integrating these areas and completing sort of the contiguity of Europe, of the European Union? Where does that stand? After all, I don't have to tell the audience, but the Balkans have been the powder keg for more than one or two conflicts in history.
Yes. As they say, we all know what is the difference between having peace and prosperity in the Balkans and not having peace and prosperity. And I think that we have been working very hard with this commission. Only 6 months have passed since we took office, to re-establish the EU in a much stronger fashion than before in the Western Balkans. And of course, in that, the key policy was and is enlargement, because they all want to become members of the European Union. And this is a big challenge also for us, but it is a priority for us. The Balkan belongs to Europe, geographically, culturally, socially. We are interlinked already. Now, what we're working on was, first of all, to re-establish the credibility of the EU in the region. I think that we're getting there. We've managed to strike a deal and open accession negotiations with North Macedonia. Something that was completely impossible last year in October. We've seen the failure at the European Council, but we've managed to put the train back on track. We had a quite successful summit with the Western Balkan leaders earlier in May, and we plan to put forward in the autumn, I hope very soon in the autumn, a fully fledged economic economic development and investment plan for the entire region. So not only for those countries who are negotiating, but the entire region. And this is how I hope we can tie and link them ever closer to our markets, to our society, our policies, and bring their economies much faster, much closer to the EU.
Oliver, there are lots more questions that I would like to ask, including regarding Syria and Lebanon and other parts of your realm. But I just want to ask one last question before, Gillian, turning it back to you and giving our audience a chance to interact with you. I know that the United States is not part of your portfolio. I know that transatlantic relations is not. But you're a European, you're a Hungarian, you're a diplomat. Share with us, if you could, to the extent you can, what's your view about the state of the transatlantic relationship and its current importance to both sides of the ocean? Because for those of us at AJC, for example, we have a profound stake in that relationship, and it's being challenged on both sides. What's your view?
Well, as you rightly said, it doesn't belong to me, and I'm not. I'm not sad about it.
I know that. But you have some thoughts, I suspect.
I do have my views on this, quite strong ones. And let me put it to this way. If I look around the neighborhood, I can list quite a number of key challenges which we cannot solve without the active presence and cooperation with the US. It's as simple as that. If I look at the Western Balkans, it's impossible to get to a peaceful dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina and get it sorted out. We need the US. If I look at Ukraine, again, impossible to solve it or even to manage it without the US. If I look at the Middle East peace process, we've just discussed it. It's hardly possible to get to any arrangement without the US. If I look at Libya, same thing. So for me, it is key, and I've tried my best to reach out in each and every single issue that belongs to me to build up or rebuild that sense of belonging together, because I think that we both need each other, and this is what I want to bring to the table, and I think that we all know this, and under the blanket of the everyday mediatization of our relations, I do hope that we can still work on the ground together.
We couldn't agree more that we need each other and we both need to work at it. Gillian, back to you and our audience, please.
Thank you. Our first question from our live audience is from Danielle Saban in Rome. We often hear about the steps necessary from Israel to show that they're ready for peace. What are particular steps Palestinians need to take to show they're also ready for a peace agreement? Can the EU play a role in facilitating this?
Well, my take on this is very simple. We would need also the Palestinians to be around the table. So most important is to be able to sit together and start the dialogue. This is what we need. It's not much of a request, I hope.
Absolutely. The next question comes from Judy Klein in Atlanta. We have unfortunately witnessed a dramatic rise in anti-Semitic violence and incidents in Europe. The EU has endorsed the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which includes modern forms of anti-Semitism linked to the demonization of Israel as the Jewish state. How has this impacted your work? Can you comment on the state of anti-Semitism in Europe and how the EU is working to combat it?
In the Commission, we have a special representative for this issue. And I think that she's doing a wonderful job. And not only that, but we have the Fundamental Rights Agency, who has just carried out a study, very important study on the nature of and the recent developments in anti-Semitism. And this is something that we are following up very closely. And this is something where we have to be vigilant every day, and we have to see to it that the findings of the study get to everybody. When it comes to my portfolio, needless to say that in the neighborhood, Jewish communities are also present. Look at Ukraine. You have over 200,000 Jews in Ukraine. You have the Middle East. You also have Jewish communities in Morocco. You have basically Jewish communities everywhere. So for me, when I talk about the need to respect minorities, be it ethnic, be it religious minorities, I also understand that this is something where we have to bring forward anti-Semitism in each and every country where this is an issue.
Thank you. And our next question is also related to anti-Semitism from Daniel Katz in New York City. In your conversations with Arab countries, do you bring up the sometimes anti-Semitic incitement in those countries? And do you also think the conversation surrounding Israel has changed in your conversations with these Arab nations?
This is a very difficult question. Of course, we bring this up. Of course, we vest enormous interest in the security of Israel. This is a priority for the EU. This has been the case, and this is going to be the case. We also see that there's a strong tendency of driving up emotions. Every time it happens, we try to intervene, but I must admit we're not always successful.
Thank you. The next question comes from Ray Termini in Dallas, an AJC member. Can you discuss the EU response to the Trump proposed peace plan to end the Israeli-Palestinian dispute? And what are some of the objections from the EU members from your perspective?
Well, as we have seen, there's a US proposal on the table now. That is one plan. So far, we have not seen another plan. Currently, the EU has a principled position, which is the two-state solution. And we're committed to this, and we continue to be ready to engage to achieve this with a dialogue where both Israel and Palestinian authorities are at the table. And as long as they can agree on this, this is going to be acceptable for the EU as well. In many of our member states, the issue of annexation is a very sensitive issue. And this is why this has been an issue which is quite dominantly present now in the press of the member states. So my take on this would be not to rush things and not to make any unilateral actions to be able to preserve the possibility of a peaceful solution.
Definitely, thank you. Our next question is from Keti Kakilias in Athens. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. As a follow-up on Turkey, what are your thoughts on Turkey directing more refugees toward Greece and the rest of the EU?
As I said, our relationship is very complex, and of course, migration is maybe the most sensitive one. So far, we have been able to cooperate with Turkey, and I do hope that we can continue that way. I see openness also on the Turkish government's side, and we want to preserve that. Of course, the latest developments we have seen just right before the outbreak of the COVID-19 in Europe we're not backing this assumption of mine. However, after that, what we have seen was that we got back to the implementation of the EU-Turkey statement, and we will continue to engage to implement that.
Thank you. Our next question comes from George Halperin in Los Angeles. We are seeing now again protests. Some protesters explicitly call for the disarmament of Hezbollah. The EU is a main financial supporter of Lebanon. What's your perspective on aid and real reforms and the end of corruption and disarmament of Hezbollah?
Well, as I said, the EU will make sure and has made sure that no terrorist organizations can benefit from EU funds, and we will continue to pursue this line also in relation to the Hezbollah. As you know, the Hezbollah is also listed as a terrorist organization in the EU, so no possibility for providing funding.
So, Gillian, if I could just step in for a moment, Oliver, if I may just follow up on that comment. I suspect you know that in 2013, this was long before you became commissioner, the EU designated the military wing of Hezbollah as a terrorist organization.
Correct. That's what I meant, yes.
Right, and in doing so, at least from our perspective, from AJC's perspective, from the American perspective, it was an important step forward, but it also created an artificial distinction between the political and the military wing. And on this one, even Hezbollah agreed with us, which is very rare, when they said to Europe, we're not two organizations, we're one organization, we're a unified organization. I'm guessing that the intent behind the question was, do you see any possibility of Europe going the next step? Germany has now done so on its own, as have the Netherlands and the UK when it was still a member. Do you see any possibility of Europe catching up with reality and designating all of Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, which at least in our judgment it certainly is?
Well, this is something that is debated among the member states.
Sure.
You know, as long as they agree on something, I'm not supposed to make any statements on that. But let me tell you this: we're very vigilant about the role Hezbollah plays, and we're following the developments very carefully. We followed very carefully why and how in Germany they have been qualified to be a terrorist organization, and of course we will take conclusions from that.
Well, I thank you for that, and I know at the end it's not your decision to make, but Lebanon is within your jurisdiction bilaterally. I mean, and the argument of some inside the EU, one country in particular, is that Hezbollah is important to the stability of Lebanon, the political stability of Lebanon. Our own view, which I think you've heard before, is that it's quite the opposite, that a group that both plays politics but also has its own military, its state within a state, cannot be considered a force for stability, especially when it seeks to trigger a war with Israel one day, which will bring ruin to Lebanon. So this is simply our view. You know our view, but we wanted to make sure that you hear it again today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Michelle Dubovsky in New Jersey. Part of your portfolio is strengthening relations with some Eastern European countries and introducing new policy objectives for the region. What are some of your priorities for these countries, and were they affected by the pandemic?
I'm quite happy to say that in the Eastern Partnership countries, the pandemia has been quite well managed. And not only that, but casualty figures are very low. So that is I think, positive news. And we've been reaching out also for these countries to mobilize all the help that we have. And to put forward, first of all, financial help for the immediate needs, so medical equipment. Second, to build up their resilience in terms of the healthcare system, so intensive care units, social financing, but also providing financing to the SME sector. The third leg of the journey is going to be the rebuilding of the economy. And so we have been mobilizing their funds again, and we hope to ensure liquidity for the economy. Other than that, we have revised the Eastern Partnership. We made a proposal again for the member states. We are having a summit with the Eastern Partner countries at leaders level next week. And we do hope that the 5 priorities that we have set forward will be adopted by the leaders, and then we can follow it up with action on the ground. There again, a resilient economy. That's going to be my first point I want to implement, because most of their vulnerabilities, if I look at Ukraine, are down to the lack of a solid, resilient economy. And this is what this was the message I got from Kiev. Help us to build it as fast as we can, and we will be there for them.
Great, thank you. Our next question is from Arnold Lipman in Boston, who's asking about Syria. Do you see any hope for an end to the conflict, and what would be the conditions for the EU to help then in the reconstruction of Syria?
Well, this is a question where I'm not sure I can provide any answer. Honestly, I don't see when and how the conflict would end. What we see is that there are always new turns in the conflict. Of course, we are ready to rebuild the country, but it cannot be rebuilding how it was. So there are fundamental reforms to be made. There's a constitution to be had on a democratic footing. Work would have to pick up in Geneva. So far, this has not been the case. So there's quite a bit to be done before we can lend support. Meanwhile, we are engaging to help those countries who are hosting large Syrian refugee communities to cope with the challenge. We will have a donors conference coming up this month to help again Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey to host these people and to take our share from the task. Other than that, we would all wish the conflict would end soon, because the state of Syria is quite devastating.
Absolutely. The next question comes from David Simon, an AJC member in our Houston region, who asks, you represent the EU in the capacity of strengthening relationships among the members and its neighbors. Does this ever come into conflict with your own country, Hungary's policies? And what have you learned from your role that gives hope to the continuation and strengthening of the EU and its role in global issues?
Well, I have 2 answers to that. First of all, I'm keeping an equal distance from each and every single member state. Commissioners are not representing any of the member states, but the common interest of all the member states. And this is the principle we all adhere to and we all pursue. So there is no issue of Hungary being in conflict with what we do, because, and this is the second answer, we're here to work for all member states. So I have an inclusive approach, so that I want all member states to agree with the policies that we're doing. This is maybe a bit old school compared to the previous commission, but this is how it worked, and this is how it works, it seems, because I had no case when Hungary had to come out against the policies we're pursuing. Hungary is committed to the neighborhood, and I think that they're playing a very positive role, be it in relation to Israel, be it the Western Balkans, even in the southern neighborhood or the Eastern Partnership countries. I think that Hungary has a vast interest in these regions, but it's not for me to pursue those. Hungary has a very agile and very good foreign minister who does that, and I think you've seen him in action.
We have met him.
Thanks. And we have time for one final question, and then David, I'll hand it back to you and the Commissioner. Our last question comes from Alice Kuglin in Washington, D.C. What does COVID-19 say about the ability of the European Union to deal with a global crisis of this magnitude? What do you think will be some lessons learned for Europe?
Well, we're still in the crisis, so it might be too early to tell. What we see at hand now is not only a health crisis, but also a major economic crisis. And one lesson I take back from this already, I'm not a health expert, so don't ask me on that one, is that we have to be much better prepared, and we have to reduce our vulnerabilities. Reducing vulnerabilities, for instance, to me means reducing the value chains our companies are working with. And our neighborhood has a huge potential. Our neighborhood has an enormous potential for our companies to reduce the value chains and invest there, and bring their investments much closer to home, and also consolidate the economic potential these regions can provide to the EU. And there, I think we have quite a job to do, and we will certainly pursue that.
So before closing,
thank you. David, back to you.
Thank you, Julian. Before closing, I just want to make two final comments, if I may. The first is that in 2004, AJC, seeing the tension between Europe and the United States after the Iraq War, and understanding the importance of maintaining this transatlantic partnership for a whole host of reasons, we opened an office in Brussels. It was a far-reaching decision. We called it the Transatlantic Institute, and very consciously, very deliberately. It's been there for 16 years, engaging with the EU, engaging with the first 28, now 27 commissioners, engaging with the European Parliament, engaging with the multitude of staff. It's a very, very complex entity, but an extremely important entity. For all the reasons you heard from the Commissioner today, the EU combined is larger than the United States. The combined GDP is larger than the United States. But most importantly, it is another concentration of democratic society. And we, the United States, we believe, need to work as closely as we can with the EU. And the other comment I would make is, and we look to the EU as a potential model for creating a different vision in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East one day. The idea that France and Germany would no longer go to war was not so obvious in 1946 and 47 and 48. But the EU has become the most successful peace project in modern history. And we believe, Oliver, that some of the elements of what has been accomplished will one day apply not just to Greece, Cyprus, and Israel, but will expand throughout parts of the Arab world and create a new vision that is largely based on the concept in the EU. So that's our vision. And with that, I summoned my very weak Hungarian, which has usually got me in big trouble, to simply say, Köszönöm szépen, to you, Oliver, for being here, and even more for being such a good friend to our office in Brussels and to all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you so much for the opportunity. And I hope to see you back in full person as soon as we can.
As do we. Bye-bye. Gillian,
right.
Back to you for the closing comment.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you, David. And thank you, Commissioner Várhelyi, for joining AJC today and for a fascinating conversation. I also want to thank our audience for joining us and showing your commitment to the topics discussed here today. In these unique times, while so many of us are separated from our family and friends, AJC is still bringing us together on the issues that matter most. Please consider making a donation to AJC so we can offer you more programs like this one and so we can continue our advocacy for Israel and the Jewish people around the world. Visit ajc.org/donate. And for the first time in AJC history, we will be holding a virtual global forum, which will take place during the same week we were scheduled to be together in Berlin next week, starting Sunday, June 14th until Thursday, June 18th. This 5-day online event will feature a moving opening plenary, conversations with world leaders, spirited debates, and the high-level content you have come to expect at an AJC Global Forum. We hope to see you there. For more information and to receive updates and announcements in your inbox, please visit ajc.org/global forum. Please stay safe and healthy. Thank you. Goodbye.